Life fell apart. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, did it with a smile right in front of everyone. We were at our family's annual 4th of July barbecue. In the backyard, my late husband, Tom, had poured his heart into. Jessica, my own son, Mark's wife, stood up and tapped her glass for a toast. I'm Carol, by the way, and this is the story of how I lost everything, only to find the one thing that mattered. She raised her glass, her voice sweet as poison. "To new beginnings," she said, looking right at me. "And to the lovely couple who just bought this beautiful home, we are so happy for you." My stomach dropped. The burgers on the grill, the laughing children, the friendly neighbours, it all faded. A man I'd never seen before, holding a set of keys, was shaking my son's hand. Jessica walked over to me, her smile never leaving her face. "The papers are all signed, Carol. You have 30 days to clear out." Her words were a whisper, but they hit me like a scream. What did she mean? This was my home. How could she do this? My mind was a blur. My son, Mark, wouldn't even look at me. His wife, Jessica, just stood there looking pleased with herself. She had sold my home from under me, the house Tom and I had built together, the place where every memory lived. I stumbled back inside, my legs feeling like jelly. On the kitchen table, where I'd left a plate of cookies just an hour before, was a crisp white envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I tore it open. It was an official eviction notice, 30 days. It was all legal. My son Mark had been given power of attorney when Tom got sick. I never imagined he would use it against me. I remembered what Mark told me after Tom's funeral. He had hugged me tight and said, "Don't you worry about a thing, Mum. I'll always take care of you." His words now felt like a cruel joke. Overwhelmed with grief, I went to Tom's closet to feel close to him. As I pushed aside his old coats, my hand hit something hard, a small, locked metal box I hadn't seen in years. The metal box was heavy and cold in my hands. It was Tom's old keepsake box, the one he always said held his most important secrets. I had forgotten all about it. Now it felt like a message from him, a piece of my husband in a house that was no longer mine. I had no key, and the lock was strong. My first thought was to call my son Mark. He would know what to do. He would remember this box. I dialed his number, but Jessica answered, her voice sharp and impatient. "What is it, Carol? Mark is busy." I took a breath. "Jessica, I found Tom's old metal box. Do you know where the key is?" There was a strange pause on the other end of the line. "A box," she said, her tone suddenly guarded. "Oh, that old thing. Just throw it out. It's nothing but junk from the army." She tried to sound casual, but I heard something else in her voice, a flicker of panic. Why would she be so nervous about a box of old junk? At that moment, I knew. Whatever was in this box, it was the last thing Jessica wanted me to find. After I hung up with Jessica, her panicked voice echoed in my ears. "Junk? No, this was something important. This box was my only hope." I took it to the garage, Tom's old sanctuary, the smell of sawdust and oil still lingering in the air. I laid the box on his sturdy workbench and tried everything. I tried a hammer, but the metal barely dented. I tried a screwdriver, hoping to pry the lock, but it wouldn't budge. My frustration grew with every failed attempt. The eviction notice felt like a ticking clock, counting down the minutes until I was homeless. I slumped onto Tom's old stool, feeling defeated. Then I remembered something he once told me, his arm around my shoulders as he locked this very box. "Everything that matters is in here, Carol," he'd said with a serious look in his eyes. "Everything that keeps us safe." His words gave me a jolt of new strength. He had a plan. I just needed to figure it out. Then, a name came to me from the past. Mr. Henderson, the old locksmith downtown who Tom trusted with everything. I just had to pray he was still there. The next morning, I clutched the heavy box and drove my old Buick into town. So much had changed. The familiar bakery was gone, replaced by a smoothie shop. But when I turned onto Main Street, I sighed with relief. Henderson's lock key was still there. Its sign faded, but standing proud. An elderly man with kind eyes and hands stained with grease looked up from his counter. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. My voice trembled a little. "Mr. Henderson? My name is Carol Miller. My late husband was Tom Miller." His face lit up with recognition. "Tom Miller? Of course. A fine man. I was sorry to hear of his passing." I placed the box on the counter between us. "Tom always said you were the only one he trusted. I need to get this open." Mr. Henderson examined the lock, his brow furrowed. He looked up at me, his expression suddenly grim. "Carol," he said slowly, "this isn't just any old lock. This is a military-grade security lock. Opening it will be difficult, and it will be loud." We went back to my garage, where Mr. Henderson said the noise would be less likely to bother anyone. He pulled out special tools, drills and long, thin metal picks. The sound was deafening. With every screech of the drill, my heart pounded. I kept glancing out the window, terrified a neighbour would call Mark and Jessica to complain about the racket. What would they do if they found me trying to get into this box? Mr. Henderson wiped sweat from his forehead. "Almost there," he grunted. "Tom really didn't want anyone getting into this easily." After what felt like an eternity, there was a loud click. The lock popped open. My hands trembled as I reached for the lid. Mr. Henderson gave me a respectful nod and started packing his tools to give me privacy. I lifted the heavy lid. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, sitting on a pile of official-looking documents, was a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. But it was the name on the top letter, written in Tom's familiar scrawl, that made the world stand still. It said, "For Jessica." My heart pounded as I stared at Jessica's name on the envelope. My Tom, writing to her. It didn't make any sense. With trembling fingers, I untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. The date on it was from the week after she and Mark got married. I began to read my husband's familiar, strong handwriting. "Jessica," it said, "you know our deal. I know who you really are and what you did back in Florida. I've agreed to keep your secrets and help you start over." I had to read the sentence again. Secrets? What secrets? The letter went on. Tom had been giving her money every month. A lot of money. In exchange, she had to be a good wife to Mark and promise to never ever hurt him. My whole body went cold. This wasn't a marriage, it was a business deal. My husband had been paying my daughter-in-law to love my son. The letter ended with a chilling warning from Tom. "As long as you make my son happy, you are safe. But if you ever turn on my family, I've made sure Carol will have everything she needs to protect herself." Underneath the bundle of letters, I saw it. A thick, leather-bound bank book. I sat at my kitchen table, the contents of the box spread out before me. It felt like I was looking at a puzzle of a life I never knew existed. I opened the bank book first. Page after page showed large sums of money being transferred from Tom's account to one in Jessica's name. The payments happened on the first of every month for 10 years, and then they stopped, right after the month Tom passed away. That's why she sold the house. The money had run out. Beneath the bank book was a thick manila folder. I slid out the documents inside. The first was a criminal record. The name on it was Jennifer Peterson, but the mugshot was a younger, harder-looking Jessica. The charge was felony fraud. My daughter-in-law was a con artist. I remembered her telling me once how she grew up in a small, quiet town with a loving family. "I was just a simple girl before I met your son," she'd said. It was all a lie. Every word, every smile. The pain of it all was sharp, but something else was sharper. My anger. Tom had left me a weapon. Now I just had to figure out how to use it. I knew I couldn't call. I couldn't give Jessica time to think, to invent a new lie. I had to see her face. I drove to the new expensive house they had bought, the one that was probably paid for with my money. When Jessica opened the door, the look on her face was a mixture of shock and annoyance. "Carol, what are you doing here?" she asked, blocking the doorway. I didn't flinch. I held my purse tight, the bank book and that mugshot feeling heavy inside it. I looked her right in the eye, my voice steady and cold. "Hello, Jessica. I think it's time we discussed your monthly allowance." The colour drained from her face. She started to stammer. I have no idea what you're talking about." I pulled the old bank book from my purse and held it up. "Tom kept very detailed records, Jennifer." Hearing her real name made her gasp. Just then, a car pulled into the driveway. It was my son, Mark. He walked toward us with a confused smile. "Mum, what's going on?" he asked, looking from my stony face to his wife's terrified one. My son Mark stood on the lawn, his keys still in his hand, looking completely lost. He saw the bank book in my hand and the terror on his wife's face. "Mum, what is going on?" he asked again, his voice filled with confusion. Jessica jumped at the chance to speak, rushing to his side and grabbing his arm. She put on her best victim face, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Mark, thank goodness you're here," she cried. "Your mother isn't well. She's been saying the most awful, confusing things about me. She's upset about the house and it's making her paranoid." Mark looked at me, his heart torn, wanting to believe his wife. "Mum, what is this about? What are you doing?" I looked past Jessica's fake tears and right into my son's eyes. I knew that revealing everything right then and there would break his heart in a way it might never heal from. I had to let him find the truth, but I would give him the key. I spoke calmly. "Ask your wife," I said, my voice low and steady. "Ask her who Jennifer Peterson from Florida is." I then turned around, walked back to my car and drove away, leaving that question hanging in the air behind me. The drive home was a blur. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. Back in my empty house, the silence was deafening. Every tick of the clock felt like a hammer blow. What was happening back at Mark's house? Was Jessica twisting the story, painting me as a crazy old woman? Would my own son turn against me? I sat in Tom's favourite armchair, feeling a terrible wave of sadness wash over me. I was sad for Mark, whose heart was about to be broken. And I was sad for Tom, who had carried this heavy secret for so long just to protect his family. I remembered him saying to me once, "A man protects his family, Carol, no matter what it costs." I finally understood. The hours crawled by, the sun went down. Every time a car drove down the street, my heart leaped into my throat. Finally, just before midnight, my phone rang. I snatched it up. It was Mark. His voice was broken, choked with tears. "Mum?" he whispered. Can you please come back over? We need to talk." When I walked back into their house, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Mark was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. He looked like a ghost. Jessica was sitting in a chair across from him, her face red and puffy from crying. The fight had gone out of her. She just looked small and defeated. I sat down quietly, waiting for one of them to speak. Mark finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pain that pierced my own heart. "She told me," he said, his voice hoarse. "She told me everything, about her name, about her past, about the money." He shook his head, looking from me to his wife. "Why, Mum? Why did Dad keep this from me? Why did he lie to me for all those years?" Before I could answer, Jessica spoke up, her voice desperate. "Because he wasn't perfect either," she blurted out, her eyes pleading with me. "Please, Carol, don't destroy Mark's memory of his father. There's another secret, something else your husband did that he didn't want anyone to know." I stared at Jessica, my mind reeling. Another secret? What was she talking about? This had to be a desperate trick, another lie to save herself. My son, Mark, looked completely broken, his head in his hands. "What secret?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "What are you talking about?" Jessica took a shaky breath, seeming to gain a little confidence. She looked at Mark, then back at me. "Tom was a good man," she said quietly, "but he was complicated. You should ask yourself, Carol, where did he get all that money to pay me every month? It wasn't from his army pension or his job at the hardware store. A cold dread washed over me. She was right. The amounts in the bank book were too large. Tom was a simple man. We lived a simple life. Where could he have gotten that kind of cash? I thought about the other papers in the box at home, the ones that looked like bank statements that I hadn't looked at closely yet. I had been so focused on Jessica's secret that I never stopped to think about Tom's. Was this just another lie, or was my entire life built on a foundation I never really knew? I drove home in a daze, Jessica's words ringing in my ears. I left Mark with her. He needed time. I needed answers. Back at my kitchen table, I pulled the rest of the documents from the box. They were bank statements, just as I thought, but not from our local bank in Ohio. These were from a bank in the Cayman Islands. My breath hitched. The statements showed an account with hundreds of thousands of dollars in it. Money flowed in and out, in transactions with companies I'd never heard of. It was a secret life, a secret fortune. I thought back over the years to all the times Tom had been quiet or worried, times I had just assumed were about bills or his health. I remembered him once saying after a long phone call, "It's just boring work stuff, hun. Nothing for you to worry about." He had been protecting me, not from money troubles, but from the truth of where the money came from. As I gathered the papers, a small folded piece of paper fell out from the bottom of the folder. It had a name, Vincent, and a phone number. Beneath it, Tom had written one word, emergency. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, filled with the ghosts of secrets. Who was this Vincent? What kind of emergency was Tom expecting? My fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it a new feeling was growing. Determination. I was not going to be a victim in my own life story. I deserved the truth, and so did Mark. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling as I dialed the number. It felt like I was stepping off a cliff in the dark. A man answered on the very first ring. He didn't say hello, just a gruff, impatient, "Yeah?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, my name is Carol Miller, my husband, Tom Miller. He left me this number." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I thought he might have hung up. Then the man's voice came back, low and deadly serious. "So he's gone. It finally happened," he said. "Listen to me carefully. Where are you? We need to meet. Don't talk to the police. Don't talk to anyone. You could be in very serious danger." "Danger?" The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My whole life, the only dangers I worried about were a bad winter storm or getting a flat tire on the highway. "What kind of danger?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My husband sold tools at a hardware store. He was a good man." The man on the phone, Vincent, let out a short, harsh sigh. "Listen to me, Carol. Your husband was a lot of things. A good man was one of them. But years ago, to protect his family, he got tangled up with some very bad people. Very rich, very dangerous people." My mind couldn't make sense of his words. "Now that Tom is gone," Vincent continued, "they are going to come looking for what they think he left behind, and they will not be nice about it." I sank into a chair, the phone feeling slick in my hand. "What do I do?" I whispered. His voice was firm. "Tomorrow at noon, go to the Oak Ridge Diner on Route 7, sit in the last booth and order a coffee. Don't bring your phone, don't tell a soul where you're going, and Carol, come alone." The next morning, I moved through my house like a ghost. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I thought about calling Mark, about telling him everything. But Vincent's warning, "Don't tell a soul," stopped me. What if telling Mark put him in danger too? As I got ready to leave, I remembered Tom teaching me to drive on the highway. I had been so scared of the big trucks and the speed. He had put his hand on my arm and said, "You're stronger than you think you are, Carol. Just keep your eyes on the road and don't look back." I had to be strong now, for him and for Mark. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, a terrifying feeling of being completely disconnected from the world. I got in my car and drove towards Route 7, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I pulled into the parking lot of the Oak Ridge Diner, it looked so normal. Families were eating breakfast. Waitresses were pouring coffee. It was a perfect slice of American life, and I was about to walk in with a secret that could burn it all to the ground. The little bell on the diner door jingled as I walked in. I slid into the last booth, my back to the wall, just like in the spy movies Tom used to watch. A moment later, a man sat down across from me. He was older, with a weary face and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "Carol," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Vincent." He told me a story that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Tom, he explained, wasn't just a regular soldier. He was part of a special intelligence unit. Years after he retired, an old contact, a ruthless man named Elias Vance, found him. Vance forced Tom to help his criminal organization hide their dirty money. "Tom didn't have a choice," Vincent said, his voice low. "Vance threatened you and Mark." But Tom fought back in secret. He siphoned off money into that secret account to give his family a way out, and he created a ledger, a record of all of Vance's crimes. "That ledger is the only thing that can put Vance away for good," Vincent said. "Now that Tom is gone, Vance wants it back. He'll start with your son to get to you." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "So tell me, Carol, did you find it in the box? Did you find the ledger?" "A ledger?" The word sounded foreign and strange. I shook my head, my mind a complete blank. "I don't know what you're talking about," I told Vincent, my voice trembling. "There was no ledger, just the letters, the bank papers, and a file on my daughter-in-law." Vincent's expression tightened. "Then that's where he hid it. Tom was smart. He would have hidden it in plain sight." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A ledger could look like anything, Carol. A little black notebook, a list of numbers that don't make sense. It could even be on a tiny computer flash drive. You have to go home and search. Look inside every book, under every floorboard. Think like Tom." I felt a wave of dizziness. This was too much. Me, a 70-year-old widow looking for a secret crime ledger. Vincent stood up to leave, placing a few dollars on the table for the coffee. "Go home and look," he said. "And Carol," he added, his eyes dark and serious, "you have to assume that Vance's people are already searching for it too. From this moment on, you are being watched." I drove home with my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Every car behind me looked like a threat. My safe, quiet house no longer felt safe at all. It felt like a trap, and I was the bait. I started searching, my hands shaking as I went through Tom's things. I looked in the pockets of his old coats. I took every book from his shelves and shook them out. Nothing. I remembered him fixing a squeaky floorboard in his study years ago. "Got to keep the house in good order," he'd said with a little smile. "Never know when you'll need a good hiding spot." I pulled back the rug and pried at the board with a butter knife, but there was nothing underneath but dust. The search was hopeless. Just as I was about to give up, my phone rang, the one I'd left on the counter. It was Mark, and he sounded like he was in a complete panic. Mum, Jessica's gone," he cried into the phone. "She just left. She packed a bag and she's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" I asked. "She left a note," he said, his voice cracking. "It says, 'I'm sorry. A strange man came to the house asking about your father. I can't put you in danger.' Mum, what is going on?" Hearing the terror in my son's voice was the hardest part of all. Vance's men had already been to his house. The danger wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. Jessica, for all her lies, had done one selfless thing. She had run to protect my son. Now it was my turn. I had to become the wall between Mark and this ugly, dangerous world Tom had been a part of. I forced myself to sound calm, like a mother soothing a child who'd had a nightmare. "Mark, honey, listen to me," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "It's probably just some confusion about Dad's will. You know how these things are. Please just stay home and lock your doors. I will take care of everything. I promise. The lie felt like poison on my tongue, but I had no choice. After I hung up, my hands were shaking too badly to continue searching. I walked to the living room window and peeked through the blinds, and that's when my blood ran cold. Parked across the street was a black car that I had never seen before. Inside, I could see the silhouettes of two men. They were just sitting there, watching my house, watching me. My heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. They were right there. I could see the smoke from one of the men's cigarettes curl up into the evening air. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I was a prisoner in my own home. Fear is a funny thing. It can paralyze you or it can make you angry. As I stood there watching those men watch me, the fear slowly started to burn away, leaving a hard, cold anger in its place. This was my home. Tom and I had built this place. I would not be scared away. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Vincent. "They have found you," it read. "Do not go outside. Do not answer the door. They want to scare you into making a mistake. Just stay put." His message was terrifying, but it also made me feel a little less alone. As I read his words, I saw one of the men get out of the car. He was big, with a heavy coat, and he moved slowly up my walkway, his eyes fixed on my front window. He didn't knock. He just slipped a white envelope into my mailbox and walked back to the car. The mailbox stood at the end of my walkway like a dare. For 10 minutes, I just stared at it. Going out there felt like stepping onto a stage with two very dangerous men in the front row, but I had to know what the note said. Taking a deep breath, I opened my front door and walked with steady, deliberate steps down the path. I didn't run. I didn't look at the car. I opened the mailbox, took out the single white envelope and walked back inside, closing and locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I tore it open. There was no greeting and no signature, just a few lines of typed text. It read, "We know about your son, Mark. He has a nice family, a nice life. It would be a shame if something happened to them. We want what your husband stole. You have 24 hours to find it." 24 hours. The words felt like a death sentence. It wasn't just about my house anymore. They were threatening my son. They were threatening to burn down his entire world to get what they wanted. I had to find that ledger. The threat against Mark lit a fire under me. I was no longer sad or scared. I was a mother protecting her child. I started searching the house again, not with quiet desperation, but with a frantic energy. I tore through everything, thinking like Tom. Where would he hide the most important thing in the world? As I pulled old boxes from the top of our closet, a sudden, sharp memory hit me. It was our 40th anniversary. Tom had made me a gift, a beautiful wooden birdhouse to hang in the backyard oak tree. I remembered him holding it, his hands so big and gentle against the delicate wood. "This one is special," he had told me, tapping the thick, solid base. "I built this one strong. It'll keep the little birds safe from anything." Safe from anything. It was a strange thing to say about a house for birds. My eyes flew to the back window. The old birdhouse was still hanging there, battered by years of wind and snow. Could it be? I had to get to it. But that meant going into the backyard, in plain sight of the men who were watching my every move. The men in the black car were watching the front of my house, but they had a clear view of the side yard that led to the back. I couldn't just walk out there. I needed a distraction, something to pull their attention away, even for just a minute. My neighbour Betty's voice popped into my head from a conversation we'd had last summer over the fence. "You have to be clever to get rid of pests," she told me, talking about the deer eating her roses. "Create a diversion." That's what I needed. A diversion. My hands shaking, I looked up the non-emergency number for the local police. I told the dispatcher that a suspicious car had been parked on the next street over, Maple Avenue, for hours. I gave them a description of a beat-up blue truck, not the black car outside. I said I was worried. The dispatcher said she'd send a patrol car to check it out. I hung up the phone and waited, my heart pounding with every second. After a few minutes, I heard it. The faint, distant sound of a police siren getting closer. As the siren grew louder, I saw the two men in the car exchange a few words. The driver sat up straight, looking in his rear-view mirror toward the main road. This was my chance. I slipped out my back door, keeping low behind the big lilac bushes Tom had planted for me. My knees ached as I half-crouched, moving toward the old oak tree at the far end of the yard. The siren was on the next street now, loud and impossible to ignore. The men were both looking away from me, focused on the potential trouble. I reached the tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My fingers fumbled at the bottom of the birdhouse. It felt solid, but then my thumb pressed into a small knot in the wood, and I heard a faint click. A little door, perfectly hidden, swung open. Inside, wrapped in a thick, waterproof cloth, was a small black notebook. I had found it. I pulled it out, a wave of relief washing over me. But just as I did, the siren faded as it turned a corner, and in the sudden quiet, the man in the passenger seat turned his head and looked directly at me. Our eyes locked for just a second across the yard, but it was enough. His face, which had been bored and tired, was suddenly sharp with alarm. He shouted something to the driver and his car door flew open. There was no time to think. I scrambled back towards the house, clutching the notebook to my chest. My legs, my 70-year-old legs, had never moved so fast. I slammed the back door shut and fumbled with the deadbolt, locking it just as I heard their heavy feet pounding across my lawn. They were yelling now, their voices angry and muffled through the door. I ran to the kitchen phone to call Vincent to tell him I had it. My fingers were just punching in the last number when I heard an explosive splintering crash from the back of the house. They hadn't bothered with the lock. They had kicked the whole door in. They were inside the house, and I was trapped in here with them. There was no time to scream. There was no time to run. Heavy footsteps were already in my house. "Old lady, we know you're in here!" A man's voice boomed from the living room. "Just give us the book. It doesn't have to get ugly." My mind went completely blank with terror, but my body moved on its own. I was standing in the kitchen, the little black notebook clutched in my hand. It felt like a block of poison. I lifted the lid of the tall kitchen trash can, shoved the notebook deep underneath a bag of coffee grounds and potato peels, and pushed it back down. Then I slipped into the narrow pantry, a space so tight it was little more than a closet for canned goods. I pulled the wooden door toward me, leaving just a tiny crack to see through, and held my breath, praying the darkness would hide me. The footsteps grew louder as they came down the hallway, heading straight for the kitchen where I was hiding. I could see them through the crack in the door. They were big men, much bigger than they had looked from across the street. They filled my small kitchen with a sense of violence. One of them swept a row of my ceramic canisters off the counter, sending them smashing to the floor. "She's not in here," he growled. The other man kicked a cabinet door off its hinges in frustration. "Find the book! Vance is not going to be happy if we come back empty-handed." They tore the room apart, yanking open drawers and cupboards. One of them walked right past my hiding spot, so close I could have reached out and touched his leg. I squeezed my eyes shut, sure he would hear the frantic beating of my heart. The angrier man let out a roar and kicked the trash can, sending it flying across the room. Garbage spilled all over my clean floor. "Nothing in here but trash," he spat. The ledger, my husband's last secret, was lying right there among the coffee grounds, just a few feet from their shoes. Just then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A police siren, wailing in the distance and getting louder every second. The two men froze, their heads snapping up like startled animals. "Cops!" one of them hissed. "Someone must have called it in." All their confidence vanished, replaced by pure panic. They didn't even glance at the trash on the floor. They just turned and bolted, crashing back out through the broken door they had come in through. Seconds later, my house was filled with police officers, their voices calm and authoritative. One of them, a kind-faced young man, gently guided me out of the pantry and helped me into a chair. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft. We got an anonymous tip about a break-in in progress. My head was spinning. I couldn't speak. I looked past the officer towards my front doorway, which was now crowded with blue uniforms. And standing there, looking perfectly calm as he spoke to a sergeant, was Vincent. He must have called them. He had been watching too. He glanced over and met my eyes, and he gave me a slow, tiny nod that no one else saw. He had saved me. But as I looked at the little black book, still half buried in garbage on my kitchen floor, I wondered, what happens now? The police officers were kind, but they asked so many questions. I felt dizzy trying to keep my story straight. Vincent stayed in the background, letting me do the talking, but I could feel his eyes on me, guiding me. Mum, did you get a good look at them? One officer asked, his pen ready over his notepad. I shook my head, following the subtle cue Vincent had given me. No, officer. It all happened so fast. They were wearing masks. Another officer looked around at the mess in my kitchen. It looks like they were searching for something specific. Did they take anything? I thought of the ledger, still lying there on the floor. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. They didn't get anything of value. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, they left. Vincent closed and locked the front door behind them, and the sudden silence of my broken home was deafening. He turned to me, his face grim in the dim light. You did good, Carol, he said quietly. Now, the real work starts. Where is it? I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the pile of garbage on the kitchen floor. Vincent carefully picked the notebook from the trash and wiped it clean with a dish towel. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages filled with Tom's neat columns of numbers and names. This is it, he whispered, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. This is what will burn Vance's whole world to the ground. I sat at the table, my hands trembling. So we give it to the police now, right? Vincent shook his head, closing the book. No, we can't, he said, his voice low and serious. Vance has people on his payroll everywhere, local cops, even judges. If we hand this to the wrong person, you and I will be dead before the sun comes up. My heart sank. Then what do we do? He looked at me, his gaze intense. There is one man I trust, a federal agent in Chicago. We have to get this ledger to him, and we have to do it ourselves, in person. He then looked around at my wrecked home. They'll be back, Carol, and they won't knock next time. You can't stay here. Pack a small bag with whatever you need. We leave in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to leave the home I had lived in for 50 years. I hurried to my bedroom, my mind a complete blank. What do you pack when you are running for your life? As I threw a few things into a small overnight bag, I knew there was one thing I had to do. I had to call Mark. He would be worried sick. I dialed his number, my hands shaking. I tried to make my voice sound light, like nothing was wrong. Mark, honey, it's me. Everything's fine. It was just a silly misunderstanding. I lied. He didn't believe me for a second. Mum, what is going on? I've been calling you. Jessica is gone. You're not making sense. I had to cut him off before my own resolve crumbled. Listen to me, honey. I've decided to take a little trip. I'm going to visit my cousin in Florida for a while. The stress has been a lot, and I just need to get away. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. A trip? Now? He said, his voice full of disbelief. Mom, that doesn't sound right. I'm coming over. No, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't. Please, Mark. Trust me. Stay home and don't go anywhere. I love you. I hung up before he could argue, the tears finally streaming down my face. I took one last look at my home as I walked out the door, the little overnight bag feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. Every window held a memory, every rosebush a story. Vincent was waiting for me in a plain, dark sedan. He didn't rush me, but his presence was urgent. As I slid into the passenger seat, he put the car in gear. "Don't look back, Carol," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "There is nothing there for you now but ghosts and trouble." I didn't listen. I watched my house get smaller and smaller until it was just another light among all the others. And then it was gone. I whispered a final goodbye to my husband, Tom, a final goodbye to my entire life. We drove for 20 minutes in silence to a row of old, rusty storage units on the edge of town. Vincent pulled up to one, got out, and rolled up the metal door. Inside was a dusty, beat-up old station wagon. "We'll take this," he said, tossing me the keys. "They're probably tracking your car and mine. This one should be clean." Driving through the night on dark country roads felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Vincent taught me the rules of being a ghost. We only stopped at small out-of-the-way gas stations, the kind with a single pump and a flickering light. "Pay with cash for everything," he instructed me as I went inside to buy us some coffee. "Don't make eye contact with the clerk. Don't make small talk. Act like you are tired and you want to be left alone. The more boring you are, the more invisible you are." I did as he said, keeping my head down and my voice quiet. The young man behind the counter barely looked up from his phone. It worked. Back in the car, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment. I was learning. But with every mile we put between us and home, the knot of fear in my stomach only grew tighter. We were driving toward Chicago, toward safety, but it felt like we were driving deeper and deeper into the darkness. Hours later, we were on a long, empty stretch of highway, the cornfields of Indiana a dark blur on either side of us. I was half asleep when a pair of bright headlights in the rearview mirror made me sit up straight. They were far back, but they were gaining on us fast. "Vincent," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That car. It's been behind us for a while now." Vincent glanced in the mirror, his face a hard mask. "Yeah, I've been watching them," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They're not state police." He suddenly cranked the wheel, and our old station wagon swerved violently off the highway and down a dark exit ramp marked with a sign for a town I'd never heard of. "Hold on, Carol," he said, his voice calm but deadly serious. "This is about to get bumpy." The car behind us followed without hesitation, its bright lights flooding our car, blinding me. They were on us. The hunt was not over. It had just caught up to us. I gripped the dashboard as our old station wagon fishtailed on the gravel road. The car behind us was a monster, staying right on our tail no matter how sharply Vincent turned. The world outside was a blur of dark trees and empty fields. "Carol, I need you to be my eyes," Vincent said, his voice tight as he wrestled with the steering wheel. "Look for a sign, a landmark, anything." My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced myself to focus. I peered through the dusty windshield, trying to make sense of the darkness. Up ahead I saw a faint reflective glint. It was a small green sign. "There!" I shouted over the roar of the engine. "It says Hickory Creek Road." That was all Vincent needed. Instead of turning, he drove straight ahead. "Hold on!" he yelled, and then we were crashing through a rickety wooden fence. The sound of splintering wood was deafening. He wrenched the wheel hard, and we plunged off the road and into the towering stalks of a cornfield, the car bucking and groaning until it finally stalled. Vincent killed the lights, and we were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness and silence. We sat frozen in the dark, the scent of dirt and broken cornstalks filling the car. My own breathing sounded like a thunderstorm in the silence. On the road, the pursuing car screeched to a halt. Car doors slammed shut. "They're in here somewhere," a man yelled. "Spread out and find them." Powerful flashlight beams cut through the corn, sweeping back and forth like searchlights from a prison. I remembered Tom teaching me how to be perfectly still when we would go birdwatching in the woods, how even the smallest movement could scare them away. I didn't move a muscle. I barely breathed. Vincent was like a statue beside me. A bright beam of light sliced through our window, hitting my face for a half-second before moving on. My heart stopped. Had he seen me? Then I heard it. The crunch of heavy footsteps in the dry dirt, getting closer and closer to our car. He was just on the other side of the cornstalks, so close I could hear the fabric of his jacket rustling as he walked. The footsteps paused just a few feet from our car. I held my breath for what felt like an eternity. Then, the man cursed under his breath, and the footsteps moved away. After a few more minutes of searching, we heard them give up. Doors slammed, an engine revved, and the car sped off down the road. Only then did Vincent and I both let out the breath we had been holding. "They're gone," he said, his voice raspy. "For now." The adrenaline left my body all at once and I started shaking uncontrollably. "What do we do now, Vincent?" I asked, my teeth chattering. "The car won't start." Vincent tried the ignition. It just made a sad clicking sound. He looked out at the first grey light of dawn breaking over the cornfield. "The car is done," he said grimly. "We're on foot from here." He grabbed the small bag with the ledger. "There's a small town about 10 miles east of here. It should have a bus station. We have to get there before Vance realizes his men lost us and puts the entire state on alert." Getting out of the wrecked car was the easy part. The hard part was the 10 miles that lay ahead of us. We pushed our way out of the cornfield and onto a long, flat country road that stretched toward the rising sun. Every step was an effort. My knees ached and my back screamed in protest. The sun got higher in the sky, beating down on us. Vincent was patient, letting me set the slow pace, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew we were on a clock. "Just one foot in front of the other, Carol," he said, his voice gentle. "That's all we have to do." I tried to be strong, but after a few hours I was exhausted. "It's easy for you to say," I gasped, leaning against a fence post to catch my breath. "You're not a 70-year-old woman." He gave me a rare, small smile. "You're doing great, Carol. You're tougher than you think." Just as I felt I couldn't take another step, I saw a cloud of dust in the distance. A vehicle was coming toward us. We were completely exposed, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The vehicle got closer, and I could see it was an old, rusty pickup truck. It could have been anyone. It could have been a friendly farmer, or it could have been Vance's men. Vincent stood in front of me, a protective shield, his hand inside his jacket. The truck slowed as it reached us, and the man behind the wheel leaned out the open window. He was an old farmer, with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple and surprisingly kind eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice raspy. "You folks look like you've seen better days. Car trouble?" Vincent nodded, his expression cautious. "Something like that," he said. "We're just trying to get into town." The farmer looked us over for a long moment. "Well, I'm headed that way myself," he said, pushing the passenger door open from the inside. "Hop in. It's too hot to be walking." We had no choice. We had to trust him. As I climbed into the dusty cab, my eyes fell on something in the truck bed, partially hidden by a tarp. It was a police scanner, the kind with all the dials and antennas. My heart froze. This farmer was not what he seemed. The ride into town was the most tense 10 minutes of my life. I clutched the bag with the ledger on my lap, my knuckles white. I could feel the farmer glancing at us every so often. I forced myself to make small talk, asking about his farm, commenting on the dry weather. I was playing the part of a sweet old lady, just like I'd seen Jessica do 100 times. The farmer played along, but his eyes were sharp. "Sure was a lot of excitement last night," he said casually, not looking at us. "My wife, she listens to the police scanner, heard the state police were chasing a car down on the highway." He paused. "You folks wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" My blood ran cold, but Vincent answered smoothly. "No, sir. We broke down yesterday evening. Been a long night." The farmer just grunted. Finally, he pulled up to the curb at the edge of a small, sleepy-looking town. The bus station was right there. "Here you are," he said with a nod. As we got out, he leaned across the seat and spoke quietly. "Be safe now. This world is full of wolves." He gave us one last, knowing look and drove off, leaving us standing on the sidewalk, stunned. The farmer's warning sent a chill down my spine. The local police were looking for us. Vincent pulled me into the small, grimy bus station, and the first thing I saw was a police officer standing by the ticket counter, talking to the clerk. He wasn't looking for us, just getting a coffee, but my heart leapt into my throat. We were fish in a barrel. Vincent steered me to a pair of hard plastic chairs in the corner, away from the officer. "We have a new problem," he whispered, his eyes scanning the big departure board on the wall. "They'll be watching the buses to Chicago. They'll be looking for a man and an older woman travelling together. It's too obvious." I felt a fresh wave of despair. "So what do we do? We're trapped." Vincent shook his head, a determined look on his face. "No, we changed the plan." He pointed to the schedule. "You were going to buy a ticket for the 10:30 bus to Fort Wayne. I'm going to take the 10:45 to Indianapolis. We have to separate." My blood ran cold. The thought of being alone with the ledger was the most terrifying thing I could imagine. Vincent walked with me to the ticket counter after the officer had left. He bought my ticket, then pressed a cheap plastic-wrapped phone into my hand. "It's a burner phone," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It only has one number in it, mine. When you get to Fort Wayne, go straight to the main public library, find a quiet spot and wait. I will call you at 3 o'clock this afternoon, not a minute before, not a minute after." He looked me right in the eyes. "Keep the bag with you no matter what. Don't talk to strangers. Can you do this, Carol?" I could only nod, my throat too tight with fear to speak. He squeezed my shoulder once, then turned and walked away. I felt a terrible sense of panic as I watched him go. A few minutes later, I was walking up the steps of the bus, the bag with the ledger clutched to my chest. I was completely, terrifyingly on my own. I found an empty seat by a window and sank into it, my whole body trembling. The bus ride was agony. Every time someone walked down the aisle, I was sure they were coming for me. The Indiana farmland rolled by, but I didn't see any of it. My eyes were fixed on the reflection in the window, watching the other passengers. About an hour into the trip, a friendly-looking woman with kind eyes and grey hair sat down in the empty seat next to me. "Hello," she said with a warm smile. "It's a beautiful day for a drive. Are you travelling to see family?" Her question was so normal, so innocent, but it felt like an attack. I had to invent a lie, just like Vincent said. I gave her a tired smile. "Yes, my sister," I said, the lie feeling clumsy in my mouth. "She hasn't been feeling well." The woman's face softened with sympathy, and she began a long story about her own sister's health problems. I just nodded along, relieved that I didn't have to talk anymore. When the bus finally pulled into the station at Fort Wayne, I hurried off and found my way to the public library. It was a big, quiet building full of strangers. I found a chair in a far corner, put my bag on my lap, and stared at the big clock on the wall. It was 2:58 p.m. The library was so quiet I could hear the loud ticking of the big clock on the wall. Each tick was a lifetime. 2:59. My hands were slick with sweat. What if he didn't call? What if he'd been caught? What would I do then, alone in a strange city with a criminal's ledger in my bag? My whole future, my son's future, was hanging on this one phone call. My entire body tensed as the clock's long hand finally clicked onto the 12. 3 o'clock. Exactly on the hour, the cheap burner phone vibrated in my hand. I fumbled with the button, my heart pounding. "Vincent," I whispered. "I'm here, Carol," his voice said, calm and steady. "I made it to Indianapolis. Any trouble on your end?" "No," I breathed, a wave of relief washing over me. "Good," he said. "Now, listen carefully. 4 blocks from your library is a train station. I've bought you a ticket for the 5:15 train to Chicago. It's waiting for you at the will call window under the name Helen Peterson." Just as he said the name, 2 police officers walked into the library. They headed straight for the front desk, right by the exit. My escape route was blocked, my breath caught in my throat. I was trapped. Vincent must have heard the panic in my silence. "Carol, what is it? What's wrong? He asked urgently through the phone. The police, I whispered, my eyes glued on the two uniformed officers. They're here. They're right by the door. For a moment I thought I was going to be sick. This was it. It was all over. But Vincent's voice was like a splash of cold water. Do not panic, he said, his tone firm and commanding. You are Helen Peterson, a grandmother visiting her sister. You have done nothing wrong. I want you to stand up, walk to the exit, and don't even look at them. Do it now, Carol. I took a shaky breath and did exactly as he said. I stood up, put the phone in my pocket, and walked toward the door. It was the longest walk of my life. I kept my eyes fixed on the glass doors, my legs feeling like lead. I walked right past them. They didn't give me a second glance. I pushed the door open and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, free. I found the train station, but when I saw the line for tickets, my blood ran cold. Standing across the lobby, staring right at me, was my daughter-in-law, Jessica. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. But it was her. Jessica. How could she possibly be here? She saw the shock on my face and rushed toward me, weaving through the crowd. She looked different. Her hair was a mess and her face was pale with fear. She wasn't the calm, perfect woman who had sold my house. She looked like someone on the run, just like me. Carol, thank God, she whispered, grabbing my arm. Her hand was ice cold. I was so worried. I called every bus station until I found the one you were heading to. Jessica, what are you doing here? I stammered. How did you find me? She shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. There's no time for that, she said, her voice low and frantic. Listen to me. You cannot get on that train to Chicago. It's a trap. I stared at her, confused. A trap? What do you mean? She pulled me away from the ticket line, her grip surprisingly strong. Vance's men, she said. They know you're coming. They're waiting for you. But I know another way, a way they won't expect. You have to come with me. You have to trust me. Trust Jessica. The woman who sold my home and smiled while she did it. The woman my husband had to bribe just to be a decent wife to my son. It felt impossible. Every part of me screamed to run, to get on that train and follow Vincent's plan. I pulled my arm away from her. Why should I ever trust you again, Jessica? I asked, my voice cold. Tears welled in her eyes, real tears this time. Because your friend Vincent thinks like a soldier, but I know how criminals think, she said, her voice desperate. Vance doesn't just set one trap, he sets 3. He'd have men waiting for you at the station in Chicago, I promise. Please, Carol. If not for me, do it for Mark. I'm trying to fix the mess I made. The final boarding call for the 5:15 train to Chicago echoed through the station. It was my last chance. I looked at the gate where the other passengers were lining up. Then I looked back at Jessica's terrified, pleading face. In that moment, I made a choice. It wasn't based on logic or reason, but on a gut feeling I couldn't explain. I turned my back on the train and followed Jessica toward a side exit. Jessica led me through a series of back hallways and out into a dirty alley behind the station. Parked next to a dumpster was an old beat-up blue minivan. It was covered in dents, and I could see old fast food wrappers and a child's car seat through the window. This is your plan? I asked, unable to hide the disbelief in my voice. Jessica unlocked the sliding door. Exactly, she said. Vance's men are looking for people who are trying to hide. They're looking for fast cars, for people travelling alone, for tickets bought with cash. They are not looking for a grandmother and her daughter taking the kids' messy minivan on a trip. She had a point. It was the perfect camouflage. We were hiding in plain sight by looking completely normal and boring. As I climbed inside, the smell of stale French fries hitting my nose, the burner phone in my bag began to ring. My heart sank. It was Vincent. He would have seen that I never picked up my ticket. He would know something was wrong. I answered the phone, my hand trembling. Carol, what's going on? Vincent's voice was sharp with alarm. The train is about to leave, and you're not on it. Where are you? I looked over at Jessica, who was nervously pulling the minivan out of the alley. I'm with Jessica, I said, the words feeling strange. She found me. She told me the train was a trap. There was a cold, hard silence on the other end of the line. When Vincent spoke again, his voice was full of fury. And you believed her? Carol, she's a con artist. She is probably working for Vance. She's leading you and that ledger right into his hands. The fear that I'd made a terrible mistake washed over me. I don't know, I said, my voice shaking. I just had a feeling. A feeling? He shot back. This isn't a game, Carol. This is life and death. I didn't know what to say. He was right. I'm sorry, Vincent, I whispered. Then you're on your own, he said, his voice flat and cold. I can't protect you if you won't be protected. Don't call me again. The line went dead. He had hung up on me. My only ally was gone. The silence in the minivan was heavy and suffocating. Vincent was gone. I was alone with a woman I couldn't trust, driving to a place I didn't know. My anger and fear finally boiled over. Where are we going, Jessica? I demanded, and I want the truth, not one more lie. Jessica kept her eyes on the road, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She took a deep breath. I'm taking you to the one place Vance would never think to look for you, she said. And the truth? The truth is your husband knew everything. Before I met Mark, I was in a lot of trouble. I worked for men like Vance. I was a part of their world. My heart grew heavy. This was worse than I thought. Tom got me out, she continued, her voice quiet. He paid my debts and gave me a chance to be someone new. Now Vance thinks I'm finally coming back to him. He thinks I'm bringing him you and the ledger. I stared at her in horror. So Vincent was right, I whispered. You are leading me into a trap. Jessica finally looked at me, her eyes full of a pain I'd never seen before. No, Carol, she said. I'm leading him into one. We drove for hours, sticking to back roads, until Jessica pulled into a small run-down motel. Inside the dim, musty room, she finally explained her desperate plan. Vance is expecting me to meet him, she said, pacing the small room. He told me to bring you and the ledger to an old abandoned warehouse just outside of Chicago. He'll be there waiting. My blood ran cold. He'll kill us both, I said. He'll get what he wants, and then we'll be gone. He'll be expecting us, Jessica agreed, but he won't be expecting the FBI. I looked at her confused. But I can't call Vincent. How will his friend, the agent, know to be there? Jessica pulled out her own small, cheap burner phone. Because I already got a message to him, she said. I have my own contacts from my old life, people who owe me favours. I sent the FBI agent the time and the location of the meeting. He'll be there, Carol. He'll have his team waiting outside. A tiny flicker of hope ignited in my chest. It was a dangerous, crazy plan, but it was the only one we had. The next day, as we drove toward the edge of Chicago, the cheerful farms of the countryside gave way to grey, forgotten factories. Every car that passed us on the highway made my heart jump. We were knowingly, willingly driving into the lion's den. I looked over at Jessica. She was pale, her face set like stone. Are you scared? I asked her quietly. She let out a short, bitter laugh. I'm terrified, she admitted. But I have to do this. I owe it to Mark to fix the mess I made of our lives, and I owe it to your husband. Tom believed I could be a better person. This is my only chance to prove he was right. In the distance I could see it. A single, massive brick building standing alone in a field of weeds. The warehouse. Jessica pulled the van over behind a line of trees about a half-mile away. This is it, she said, her voice a tense whisper. Once we walk in that door, they're going to search us, the van, everything. I clutched the bag on my lap, where the ledger was hidden. Then how do we get it past them? Jessica turned to me, her expression grim. We don't, she said. You're going to hand it right over to them. My mind was screaming. Hand it over? After everything we had been through? But I looked at Jessica's face, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the same strength and determination I had seen in my husband, Tom. I trusted her. We got out of the van and walked toward the huge, silent warehouse. The big metal door slid open before we reached it, and 2 of Vance's men guided us inside. The place was vast and empty, except for a single chair in the middle of the room. A well-dressed man with slick, grey hair stood up from the chair and smiled. It was a cold, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jessica, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm so glad you decided to come home." He then turned his chilling gaze to me. "And Mrs. Miller, a pleasure to finally meet you. I believe you have something that belongs to me." My hands shaking, I held out the bag. One of his men snatched it and gave it to him. Vance opened the black notebook, a look of triumph on his face. "Excellent," he said. "Now, there's just one loose end to tie up." He pulled a small silver gun from his jacket and aimed it right at Jessica. Time seemed to slow down. Vance's finger tightened on the trigger. Jessica squeezed her eyes shut. In that split second, I knew I couldn't just stand there and watch. My mind raced, searching for anything I could use. I remembered the names and numbers I had skimmed in the ledger. "Wait!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the huge, empty space. Vance paused, looking at me with mild annoyance. "You think Tom didn't have a backup plan?" I blurted out, the lie coming easily. "He told me about your partners. He told me about the secret account you kept from them. If you kill us, that information goes straight to them." For a second, Vance hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. He didn't know if I was bluffing. That hesitation was all we needed. Suddenly, a deafening crash exploded behind us as the main warehouse doors were smashed open. Men in dark uniforms and helmets flooded into the room, carrying rifles. "FBI! Drop your weapon!" they screamed. The trap had been sprung, but in the chaos, Vance was too fast. He grabbed Jessica and pulled her in front of him, using her as a human shield. The world became a swirl of shouting and guns. The lead FBI agent was yelling at Vance to let Jessica go. Vance was yelling back, dragging Jessica toward a side door. I was frozen. Useless. This was my fault. I had trusted her, and now she was going to die. I felt a hand on my arm and turned to see a familiar, grim face. It was Vincent. "I got her message," he said, his voice low. "I never lost you, Carol. I was just waiting for the right moment." He had been here all along, working with his FBI friend. He followed my gaze to where Vance was trying to escape. While Vance was distracted, screaming at the agents, Vincent moved. He was silent and fast, a shadow moving along the wall. He circled around behind Vance, who was completely focused on the agents in front of him. Just as Vance was about to slip out the door with Jessica, Vincent lunged. He tackled Vance hard, sending them both crashing to the ground. The gun flew from Vance's hand. Jessica scrambled away, and in a second the FBI agents were on top of Vance, cuffing him. It was over. It was finally truly over. The days that followed were a blur of police stations and men in dark suits. I sat in a clean, quiet office in a tall building in Chicago, telling my story over and over again. Vincent was there with me the whole time. The lead FBI agent, a kind man named Harris, finally sat down with me. "Your husband was a hero, Mrs. Miller," he said gently. "For the last 2 years of his life, he was working with us as a confidential informant. He was building our entire case against Vance from the inside. It was all a lie to protect us. The secret money, the strange trips, it was all part of his cover. The money in the offshore account was evidence he had collected. He wasn't a criminal. He was saving lives." I looked at Vincent, my eyes filling with tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He gave me a sad, tired smile. "It was Tom's one condition," he said. "No matter what happened, you and Mark were to be kept safe and out of it. I had to honour my friend's last wish. Tom hadn't left me a mess to clean up. He had left me his legacy. The FBI took care of everything. The sale of my house was stopped, and the men who had bought it were found to have connections to Vance. I was finally able to go home. The first thing I did was call my son. I sat with Mark at my kitchen table, the two of us surrounded by the wreckage of our old life, and I told him everything. I told him about the lies his wife had told, and I told him about the incredible secret bravery of his father. He cried, and I held him. A few days later, Jessica came to the house. She stood on the porch, looking small and ashamed. "I am so sorry, Carol," she whispered, "for everything." I looked at her, the woman who had caused me so much pain, but who had also, in the end, risked her life to do the right thing. "Tom believed you could be a better person," I said, my voice quiet. "He gave you a second chance. I think it's about time you proved him right. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start." A few months have passed since that terrible night. The broken door has been replaced. The smashed canisters are gone. Life is quiet now. With the help of the government, the money Tom saved from Vance is now legally mine. It's not a secret fortune, but a nest egg, just like he wanted, to keep me and Mark safe. My son and Jessica are working things out. They are in counselling, trying to build something real out of all the lies. Sometimes I see them holding hands, and I see a flicker of real hope. This morning, I was sitting in my garden weeding the roses Tom planted for me. The sun was warm on my back. I'm no longer just a sad old widow. I am the woman who walked through the fire and came out the other side. I'm the keeper of my husband's secret, heroic story. I thought about Tom and I didn't feel